outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. Since we've no place to go.
Hello everyone, this is Denise at Something Beautiful Handcrafts. And so, if this seems a little awkward, it is. I've been trying to record my videos a day in advance so that I can get them out in a timely manner. And because I really want to stick with something close to this commitment for Vlogmas. If you're a subscriber, you know that most of the time my videos are hit and miss because I make them whenever, I feel like I have something to say or I feel creative, which basically is not all the time. And sometimes projects just take a long time. So I have to progress to the next step before I can make the videos, which is a little complicated when you have real life to deal with. So, in anticipation of Vlogmas, I've been trying to get at least 2 days ahead. So I recorded 2 days worth of video for the sock knitting machine. And I had the yarn all planned out. And then, there wasn't a lot of that yarn. I don't usually dye yarns in big batches. They're usually one-offs or 2 or maybe 3 skeins that I had planned to sell. So it seems that the skeins needed to be used for other than my own purposes, is what I'm going to say. And so when I started the video it's actually been almost a week since I started the preparation for that video. Now that the skein that I have is no longer for my own use. So I was like this morning, well, what do I do? Do I dye up another skein to match that one? Do I just show the video anyway and explain what happened to the original skein that I was at the first part of the video? What do I do? And so I've just decided that in the meantime, while I decide what skein to use in replace of the one that's going away, I'm just going to make a different video. Because I'm making the socks as a gift, special gift for a friend. And I kind of had my mind around that particular skein. So now that it's not available, I'm like, oh, what do I do? But that's just going to take a little bit. So in the meantime, I decided to push on to the spinning part of my Vlogmas plans. Okay, so this is a mix of things. First of all, this is the meat breed sheep study that I posted for the Makers Monday. I think might have been 2 weeks ago, might have been last week. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that. And also, this is the answer to the question about how do you spin thin yarns. I'm still working on the Spinner's Book of Yarn Designs, and I probably will interject that in there too, because I really need to get that group back to moving. But there is a section in there that I really want to get to about spinning thin yarns. And just really quickly, I'm going to tell you there's a lot of practice about thick and thin to help you learn how to control the thickness of your yarns. And then too, there was a call to submissions. I think it was Ply Magazine's last one about tips for spinning yarns. And so I had wanted to submit a proposal about how I, decide what yarn thickness I'm going to spin and how I spin consistent yarns. What happened was I wrote my proposal and I have to noodle over everything. It just takes like a long time, most of the time, for me to make any decisions on anything, as you can tell from how long it takes me to make videos. And so in between the time that I had decided that I was going to submit the proposal and the deadline time, I just completely lost my mind and missed the deadline. So now that I don't have to worry about keeping those thoughts under wraps until after publication, I can go ahead and feel free to tell you what it is that I do. I submitted another proposal, and I'm not even going to talk about what it's about, because if I get chosen for the article, I don't want to spill the beans before the article gets published. But I had actually planned to make a video on that particular thing, and it's I've chosen not to anymore, because that's just in case. So we'll see. If I'm not chosen, then I will go ahead and make the video, because it had been requested, and that's the reason why I haven't responded to it. Okay, so let me tell you how I spin thin yarns, or basically how I spin yarns to a thickness that I want. Okay, the first and most important thing for me is fiber prep. It's really hard to spin thin, consistent. I don't want to say really hard. It depends. It's harder to spin thin, consistent yarns when you have fiber that has VM, is stuck together, or has a lot of neps, because those things make for inconsistent yarns. This is also a thing when you want a yarn that's smooth. Also, when you are spinning long draw, you want your fiber prep to be consistent if you want a smooth yarn, or if you want a smooth long draw. So that's the number one thing. Now that I've said that, I have been able to, with certain fibers in certain conditions, take a chunk of fiber and spin from the tip and get a pretty consistent yarn. But it really depends on the fiber itself and the condition of the coat, because there are some coats, especially things like alpaca, where they are fluffy at the cut ends and they're relatively smooth. They're not clumped together, and you could basically spin from the tips, right from the lock. Some of the long wools, and they just come apart and spin like butter. Then there are some times where I have to take the end, and usually if I'm spinning like that from the tip, I spin from the cut end. So when people say to me that cut Angora doesn't spin all that well, I'm always like, huh? Because cut alpaca, you know, other smooth cut fibers, some of the long hair fibers, I just cut from the cut end. And if I need to rough it up a little, or in this case to smooth it out a little, in wool's case, I just flick out the ends and I spin from this. And as long as this end right here, the tips are not really badly matted or a lot of VM, as I spin, they tend to pull apart pretty nicely. And what happens is, you can see I've pulled that. You can't see any gunk in the tips. Okay. If there's a tip down here that's like that, it will leave that in my hand as I pull, you know, because I'm pinching at that source. But for the most part, no. If the fiber has a lot of gunk, and I'm just going to use gunk because we're talking about VM, we're talking about second cuts, we're talking about dirt, we're talking about all kind of stuff, whatever that is down there, then I just flick both ends. Okay. So now pretty much I can spin this pretty smooth. My fingers are going to do a little more work as I spin this than they would do if I had actually worked it out. So there is a YouTube video. It's old now. It's from an Angora video where I just had cuts of clumped Angora, and I spun it just like that. Just picked up clumps, just spun it right off the tip, and you can see my fingers doing the work of teasing it, which would not need to happen. You know what? This is going to need a little something. This is kind of short, so it doesn't quite tie on the way I would like it to. Anyway, you can see my fingers doing a lot of extra work right? But they wouldn't have to do that work if I had done some kind of prep to it. So prep is my first thing. And release the tension from here. Okay, so number 2 would be to choose a fiber that is longer. Haha, fiber choice. I can spin thin from the shorter yarns, yes. But it seems in some cases that longer staple fibers like to spin thinner. Also, fibers that have a lot of crimp to them like to spin thinner. So fiber choice is definitely on my list. Okay, so after prep, fiber choice. Now, the next thing I would say to do is what you just saw me like not do. And when I was first beginning, I did it all the time. Now I have a muscle and eye memory, so I don't do this that much unless I'm spinning something really thin thinner than what I normally would. Okay, so I choose a leader that is roughly the same size of the fiber that I want to spin. So I would take a lace weight yarn and split it, and then put that as the leader at some point. And that's what I would use to judge the thickness of my yarn. Also, and now I can't see where I put it at, I have a spinner's control card. I had a spinner's control card. Oh, there it is. Give me a moment. Which I don't use as much anymore because, like I said, after a while, for me, I developed a memory for the thickness that I need. But I have a spinner's control card. And so I judge it based on this card. And that really helps for you to build a visual memory of what you're seeing. Okay, so then the key component is, after you've got that fixed in your head, is understanding, or, it's a little bit of understanding, it's a little bit of skill, is how much fiber to put inside of the drafty zone. I know you've heard me say that before. And also you need to turn your tension down. If this was a Louette, I would just spin without the brake band on. And then I'm free to adjust the tension by my hand. The Louette is a bobbin-led wheel where the brake band is on the flyer and the wheel gears are actually on the bobbin. This Ladybug is a flyer-led wheel. And that means that the gears they turn the flyer, and the brake is on the actual bobbin. Okay, so in a very oversimplified way, what that does is with the brake on the flyer, it produces a lot of uptake, which means the machine pulls the fiber a lot harder. And so when I first got the Louette, people told me, well, you can't spin thin yarns on the Louette. And that is not at all true. It's harder if you don't know how to set up the machine to spin thin yarns. What I did for the Louette, 2 things. First of all, I never spun with the brake band on, which, by the way, if you're not careful and you're getting up and moving, you will knock your flyer off the machine because there's nothing holding the flyer to the machine when you don't have the brake band on, because it goes right across the top here and you can kind of knock it out. But that reduces the amount of drag that you have on the yarn going in. Also, I did something that was called lacing, and that's when you cross the yarn across the hooks on the machine, and that creates a break on the bobbin, kind of creates a little drag, and it keeps the machine from driving, really sucking that yarn across the bobbin here. A little friction, a little drag. So if I needed to spin really thin, and I've spun like thread on the Louette, mean, I really seriously, like, you could put sewing machine thread next to it and it would be the same. On that luette, it's just creating the amount of drag you need in order to slow that thing down and not have so much pull on it. On the ladybug, I just adjust the bobbin here. The take up changes that way with the brake band. It's time for me to change that brake band. It's like falling apart back there. And so, but I would honestly say that it's easier for me to spin thin on the luette than the ladybug with the bobbin lead, what they call the Scotch tension, only because I feel like I'm always adjusting the brake band. Like, it's real sensitive. So I'm always adjusting it. Whereas the luette, I'm mostly doing it by basically controlling it by hand and the speed of how I treadle. Because once you lace it, your uptake is like really low, and you're creating the uptake depending on the speed you treadle. Okay, so you can see how I'm just barely letting any fiber into that drafting zone. And I'm consistently barely letting the same amount of fiber. That's the thing too, is you just kind of have to build this eye for how much of that fiber you're going to let in there. And add more if you need to. Unwind it a little bit, take away. Hopefully this is making sense to you. The good thing about this is with the Vlogmas, if you watch this and you make comments, the next video I can just completely answer that question right away. As opposed to my usual videos where I might make it and then it might be 2 weeks later before I make something else. And I've kind of got plans, but I am just, well, I don't want to say I'm hanging about. I'm actually doing like real stuff like painting this room. But I'm actually standing by with the videos at this point, making changes to them as I read the comments or hear suggestions. So at any point you can say, hey, you were too far away from the camera, or I'd like to get a closer view, or can you do this? And I can respond to you pretty quickly, which is so why when I have these videos up like first thing in the morning, and why I had made them in advance that way, you're not watching this late at night and then I'm already on to the other video before I had a chance to respond. Okay, now see here's because I did not prep this as well as I should. There's a piece of VM. There is a second cut or a nep right here, and that is something that would interrupt the lace in this yarn. So like I said, depending on the condition of your fleece, you want to prep that and get rid of that. You don't want anything to keep this fiber from being as smooth and thin as possible. Notice that besides talking about the luette, difference between the tension and adjusting the brake band, I haven't said anything about making any recommendations to change the whirl on the machine itself. Yes, it's great to have these different ratios, but like I said, I've had that luette for years, and I did not have access to high speed whirls and all that kind of stuff. I just had a basic machine. And I mean, if you have a spindle, you don't have all that stuff anyway. Everything you do is really controlled by your hands. Basically, the spindle is controlled by your drafting, and you just hold the spindle longer as it spins in order to put the amount of twist that you need into a thin yarn. So having those different whirls, and I do have 2 different whirls on this, but having those different whirls is not the end-all be-all to spinning thin yarn. You can control your machine without changing the actual whirl. Here's what it does do though. If I'm not using the smallest whirl, that does mean that I am treadling faster. And that is the reason why I don't use the smallest whirl, is because I like the rhythm of treadling faster. And so I found that since I am treadling so fast, that it's easy to overspin things. And it was easier for me to simply leave it on the largest whirl in the case of the Louette, or on the second largest whirl in the case of the Ladybug, than it was for me to actually slow down my treadling. See, I got a spot too thin. That this may not be the same solution for you. Your mileage may vary. You may be a medium treadler, if that's a word. So don't worry about that. Do what you need to do to make it feel right for you. So that'll be the last thing for me, is that use the lowest setting or the lowest size for the whirl that you have, which is what a lot of people do when they spin lace. This thing is very noisy. It could stand to be oiled. Okay, that is about it for now. I think I've chatted your ear up long enough. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great day.